At the will reading, the sound that struck hardest wasn't the lawyer's voice. It was my parents laughing as they handed my sister a check worth more than most houses. Then a single dollar slid toward me, crisp and mocking. My father didn't blink when he said, "Go earn your own." My mother smirked, almost pleased with herself. Some kids just don't measure up. No one disagreed, not even my sister. I stayed silent, my hands resting on the table, while the lawyer hesitated over a sealed letter my grandfather had left only for me, pausing just long enough to make my mother's smile falter. I used to think silence was just something rooms had when people stepped out of them. Growing up, I learned it could sit beside you, even when the whole family was at the table, filling plates, pouring water, passing dishes over your hands as if you weren't there. At 8, I learned how invisibility worked. It wasn't that no one saw you, it was that they pretended not to. I remember one afternoon in late fall, the same pale light that would later spill across that will reading table. My mother was arranging trophies on the living room shelf, polishing each brass plate with the sleeve of her sweater. All of them belonged to Liana. Debate medals, piano competition awards, a glass plaque with her name etched in sharp surf letters. My own project ribbon, a blue strip I earned at a county science fair, sat folded on the corner of a side table. No frame, no shine. By the end of the evening, it was gone. My father always said things like, "Focus on real achievements," while tapping Liana's shoulder, telling her which internships she'd secure, which schools would take her. He spoke to me differently, less like a daughter and more like a placeholder, the one expected to manage the things no one else wanted: walking the dog, cleaning the yard, returning forgotten items. "You're steady, Julia," he said once, as though steadiness were a consolation prize. But the only person who didn't speak to me that way was my grandfather, Walter. His voice was slow, patient, as if he were giving me time to decide whether his questions deserved answers. He'd take me to the lake house on weekends, the scents of old wood and the soft thrum of water against the dock settling into my bones. He kept 2 fishing rods, one new, one carved with his initials, and always handed me the carved one. "People pay attention to the wrong things," he told me. "They look at the surface, not the pool beneath it." Those afternoons were the only times I felt seen. We'd sit with our lines in the water, letting the wind shift the reflections. He never asked why I was so quiet. He already knew. Once, he motioned with his chin toward a bird perched on the railing, its feathers ruffled by the breeze. "Watch long enough," he said, "and you notice what others miss." I didn't understand then, but he was giving me the skill my family lacked: the ability to read between actions, to find truth in the smallest details. One winter break, when Liana won another award, my parents threw a dinner. Friends filled the house with bright voices and heavy perfume. I stood in the hallway carrying coats to the back room. As I passed the dining table, I heard my mother laugh softly, the same way she did at the will reading years later. "Julia's fine," she told a guest. "She doesn't need much." That sentence remained with me longer than anger ever could. It was the moment I understood that in this family, needing nothing meant deserving nothing. It wasn't cruelty. They simply believed their own story about who deserved what. I went back to the lake house the next morning. My grandfather was already at the dock, sorting tackle. When he saw me, he didn't ask why I'd come early. He just handed me the carved rod and waited until I sat beside him. The water was still, the air cold, the world honest in a way home never was. That was the day I learned my place in the Hartman family, and the day I realized I would eventually have to choose whether to stay in it. The morning after the will reading, the house felt wrong. Too bright, too busy. My parents moved through the lake house like surveyors, opening drawers, lifting framed photos, talking numbers as if grief were an accounting term. I stood near the window, watching frost melt along the deck rail, trying to quiet the echo of their laughter from the day before. Liana drifted in with a mug she never drank from. She hovered beside me as if she wanted to say something meaningful, but couldn't risk choosing the wrong words. "It was a shock for all of us," she murmured, her eyes fixed on her reflection in the glass. Not me, us. Even in comfort, she centered herself. My father entered next, carrying a stack of folders from my grandfather's office. He set them on the table and thumbed through the pages with the casual ownership of someone certain they deserved everything. "We'll sort this," he said, meaning they would. His eyes skimmed past me the way one glances past a coat rack. "Your sister will handle most of the responsibilities." My mother followed behind him, sorting envelopes, humming a tune I couldn't place. When she reached the small pile meant for me, just the dollar, the sealed letter, and a key, she paused long enough for the silence to thicken. Then, without lifting her head, she delivered the line that locked everything into place. "Go earn your own." No heat, no hesitation, only a verdict. Liana shifted, uneasy. My father pretended to reread a document. The only sound was the distant creak of the dock settling into the cold water outside. I didn't reply. My hand closed around the sealed envelope, its weight suddenly heavier than everything they had claimed for themselves. For the first time, I realized they weren't overlooking me. They were erasing me, and they expected me to accept it. I left the lake house before anyone noticed. No door slam, no goodbye, just the soft click of the latch behind me. The air outside carried a thin edge of winter, sharp enough to steady me as I walked to my car. I placed the sealed envelope on the passenger seat and drove toward town, the trees blurring into one muted line. With every mile, their voices loosened their hold. At the small inn near the ridge, where my grandfather and I once stopped for hot chocolate, I checked in without explanation. The owner, Rosa, recognized my name but didn't ask questions. She handed me a key and pointed to a quiet corner room. A gift, 4 walls that asked nothing of me. Inside, I set my notebook on the desk and finally opened the envelope. A key, a short letter in my grandfather's handwriting, a set of numbers, and one line beneath them. "Start where the truth was first bent." No instructions beyond that, no explanation, just enough to pull me toward the dark corners he had always hinted at, the places where appearances replaced honesty long before I understood the cost. I read the letter 3 more times, following each curve of his pen. Then I wrote the numbers in my notebook. I tested them against every pattern I could think of: dates, entries, valuations. Eventually, the columns aligned in a way that made sense only if you understood why someone would hide certain payments and inflate others. And I did. I powered on my laptop and began the work I knew best: quiet, methodical, exact. I checked archived documents linked to my grandfather's old company. I compared notes with public filings. I mapped the flow of payments that never matched the official timeline. When something didn't align, I highlighted it. When it repeated, I boxed it in red. Hours passed like minutes. No fury, no tears, only clarity. The truth wasn't buried. It was sitting in plain view, waiting for someone not invested in the illusion to actually look. By late afternoon, my notebook was half full. Patterns surfaced. So did motives. A particular series of payments, rounded amounts, always just below thresholds that would trigger review, appeared again and again under a shell entity my father once advised. I leaned back, letting the weight of it settle. Not surprise, not even disappointment, just the confirmation of what silence had whispered for years. I drew a line across a fresh page. Then I built a timeline: dates, locations, signatures, inconsistencies, all grounded in public record or materials my grandfather had tucked away in his study. No accusations, no speculation, only facts arranged cleanly enough to speak without interpretation. I didn't need to fight them. The truth could do that alone. When the sun fell behind the hills, I took out the second item from the envelope, the key. I knew exactly which door it belonged to, the locked cabinet beneath his desk, the one he always touched before leaving the study, a habit I filed away years ago without understanding. I closed my notebook and slipped it into my bag, then drove back to the lake house, arriving after twilight. Their cars were still there, arranged neatly like pieces on a board. I moved quietly, my steps absorbed by the damp wooden planks. Inside, the house was dim. A few lights glowed down the hall. Laughter drifted from the living room, thin, uneasy, forced. They were talking about investment projections. Even now, still hungry. I slipped into the study unseen. The air was still, holding the faint scent of old books and cedar. The desk lamp cast a soft circle of light over the locked cabinet. I knelt and fit the key into the metal slot. It clicked open with a sound that felt final. Inside were binders, then, labeled only by years, a stack of notes in my grandfather's handwriting, a small recording device, several printed emails, and a single envelope addressed to me, sealed with the same care as the first. I didn't open it yet. Instead, I sorted through the binders. Page after page confirmed what I already traced. My parents' fingerprints on decisions that stripped him of control in ways he never publicly admitted. Rounded payments, notes written in my father's legal phrasing, a pattern of advice that didn't match the outcomes. I scanned what mattered and saved the digital copies to a cloud folder, then backed them up twice. Simple, professional, clean. In the corner of the study was a camera, so small it blended into the wood frame of the bookshelf. I hadn't noticed it before, but my grandfather's letter had given me everything necessary to understand. Truth is only effective when the right people see it. The lake house recorded everything, their actions, their words, their intentions. I stood slowly, letting the realization settle like dust in a quiet room. This wasn't revenge. This was administration, carried out by a system he built and placed in my hands. I closed the cabinet, locked it again, and slipped the key into my pocket. No need to announce anything. Not yet. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard my mother's voice rise, crisp, certain. Julia will stay out of this. She never had the mind for complex matters. I paused, unseen. Their voices filled the house, confident in their assumptions, unaware the walls were finally listening. I turned away, steady, silent. This time, I wasn't here to be included. I was here to finish what he started. Morning light slid across the lake house floor in a thin, cold line when I returned. My parents were already dressed, too formal for the hour, too composed for something they believed still under their control. Leanna hovered nearby, twisting the edge of her sleeve. When the knock sounded, all three straightened as if bracing for applause. It was only Mr. Boone, my grandfather's longtime friend. He stepped inside quietly, carrying a folder and a small device. He nodded at me first, then at the others. No greeting. My mother's smile tightened. "Is this necessary?" He didn't answer. He placed the folder on the table and pressed a button on the device. The room filled with the soft click of an audio file starting. Then came my grandfather's voice, steady, unmistakable, recorded in the same study where my parents spent yesterday tearing through his things. "If this is being heard, it means the conditions have been met." My father shifted, unbalanced. My mother's expression held rigid. Grandpa continued. "I trusted the people closest to me to handle my work with integrity. Some did not, so I left instructions to ensure the truth would be seen clearly, without debate." A second click. Footage appeared on the small screen. My parents in the study, opening drawers, discarding photos, evaluating items like inventory. Their voices carried plainly, talk of property value, leverage, entitlement. My mother stepped forward. "This is taken out of context. We were—" Mr. Boone raised a hand. Silence. Another clip followed. This time, records projected onto the screen. Payments, notes, rounded numbers, the same anomalies I circled in my notebook. My father's initials appeared more than once. My mother's signature on advisory memos she had always claimed were routine. My father exhaled sharply. Old paperwork, misinterpreted. This doesn't prove any. The recording shifted again. My grandfather's voice returned, softer now, edged with weariness. Julia, if you're hearing this, you have already seen what they hoped would never be found. The will reading was not the end. It was the beginning. Everything that comes next relies on what you choose to do with truth that was buried. My mother's composure cracked. A flash of panic crossed her eyes. Julia, stop this. You don't understand how these things work. But I didn't say a word. Mr. Boone opened the folder, sliding out a set of documents. Clean, official, signed long before my grandfather died. These are the final directives, he said. Your father and mother retain the properties assigned to them. Your sister keeps her trust, but the remainder of the estate, including controlling interest in your grandfather's research foundation, transfers to Julia alone. My father stood. Absolutely not. This can be contested. It can, Boone said calmly. But if contested, every asset defaults to the foundation in full. That was Walter's stipulation. There is also a clause regarding possible legal review of past advisory work. You know which work he meant. The room quieted. My mother's breath hitched. Liana stared at the floor, cheeks pale. I stepped forward, not to speak, but to place the key from the locked cabinet on the table. A small sound, barely audible. My mother flinched as if it were a gavel. Boone met my eyes. All that's left is acknowledgement. I nodded once. No anger, no victory cry. Just the clean click of something falling into place. My parents said nothing, not because they agreed, but because they finally understood there was nothing left to argue. Behind them, the lake outside the window stayed still. The dock didn't creak. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. The reversal wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I stayed behind after everyone left, letting the lake house settle back into its natural quiet. The air inside still held the faint scent of cedar and old paper, my grandfather's trace untouched by the storm that passed through. I stood at his desk, fingertips on the worn edge, the same place he used to tap when he was thinking. Now it felt like a boundary line I had finally stepped across. Outside, the water barely moved. A thin layer of mist hovered above it, rising and fading like slow breaths. I opened the door and walked to the dock, boards cool beneath my feet. The same boards I sat on as a child, with a simple need to understand the world. Back then, Grandpa would point at the quiet surface and say, "Still water tells the truth if you know how to listen." For the first time in months, I listened. No echoes of my mother's voice, no sharp corrections from my father, no strained smiles from my sister, just the soft lap of the lake and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I didn't replay what happened inside. I didn't wonder whether they felt guilt or loss. Their reactions were no longer mine to carry. The documents, the recordings, the truth. They had done their work. What remained belonged to me alone. The sun pushed through a break in the clouds, laying a thin gold stripe across the water. I watched it stretch toward me, warm and patient, like an invitation. The quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. I sat at the edge of the dock, letting my feet hover above the surface. The cold air touched my skin lightly, almost gently, as if the lake recognized the shift. For the first time, I felt the beginning not of justice, but of freedom. In the end, it wasn't the documents or the recordings that changed anything. It was the silence that followed, the kind that settles only when truth is no longer questioned. Some endings arrive quietly, some freedoms too. I stepped back from the dock, knowing this time the quiet belonged to me. If the story stayed with you, Linger a moment, breathe, and stay close. More quiet truths wait for the ones